Why had everyone gone silent the moment she walked into the mess hall? The room didn't freeze all at once, just small pockets at first. A turned head here, a lowered voice there. Then the ripple grew, like a slow tide spreading across steel tables and fluorescent lights, until even the clatter of trays sounded hesitant. Lieutenant Kara Reynolds felt eyes on her, the kind that didn't linger long enough to provoke a reaction but stayed long enough to mark her as different. And she didn't blame them. She was different, just not in the way they thought. She kept moving, expression calm, posture straight, carrying that usual quiet presence she'd perfected years ago. A presence that neither invited nor welcomed conversation. She took her usual seat at the corner table, the one closest to the far wall where no one could sit behind her. Habit, not paranoia. Or at least that's what she told herself. Her tablet lit up as she swiped through the brief. Lines of classified text, maps, intelligence updates, a hostage extraction in central Somalia, urgent, messy, unpredictable, 3 American aid workers, and one name she hadn't expected to see buried in redacted code, a missing CIA officer, someone she knew, someone who shouldn't have been anywhere near this operation. But there was something else too, something Colonel Collins had hinted at in her midnight call, a breach, a leak, a shadow around her team she couldn't quite name yet. Her finger hovered over the last encrypted line. She didn't open it, not yet. Across the room, laughter erupted from a table of Marines, too loud, too forced, the kind of laughter built more on ego than humor. And in the middle of that group sat Sergeant Marcus Dawson, square jaw, barrel chest, a man built like he'd been carved out of the side of a mountain, decorated, experienced, respected, and today already half drunk. His eyes swept the room, settling on Reynolds with the kind of interest she'd come to recognize instantly. Resentment mixed with boredom, poured over a foundation of ignorance. She pretended not to notice. "Look at this," Dawson said, voice carrying easily. Another Navy officer hiding behind a screen. You'd think someone with her ribbons would at least know how to fire a weapon. His squad shifted uncomfortably. One nudged him under the table. He ignored it. Reynolds kept reading. "Stay focused." She learned long ago that silence was a weapon all its own, stronger than anger, sharper than pride. Silence could build walls. Silence could protect secrets. But sometimes silence could provoke the wrong men. Dawson rose. His boots struck the floor with that heavy, uneven rhythm of someone trying to look sober. He grabbed his water bottle, a bottle nobody believed actually held water, and walked toward her. Reynolds didn't look up, not even when he stopped right in front of her table, not even when his shadow fell across her tray. "You hear me talking to you, Navy?" he asked. "Nothing." The first rule hammered into her during the early days of the program came back to her in fragments. Never escalate, never reveal, never allow emotion to dictate action. So she took a breath, slow, steady, and answered only, "I'm reviewing mission intel, Sergeant. If you have an issue, you can file a report with Colonel Collins." Her voice was level, professional, not a hint of tension. But Dawson didn't hear the calmness. He heard dismissal. "That's the problem with your kind," he snapped. "Hiding behind paperwork, hiding behind rank, acting like you're better than everyone else." Someone across the room stood, ready to intervene. Another Marine quietly muttered, "Sarge, leave it. Not today." But Dawson leaned closer, breath hot with alcohol. "Women like you think you've earned a place here, but you haven't, you're just—" She finally looked at him. Just a small shift of her eyes, but it was enough. He reacted like she'd struck him first, like her calmness was an insult. "Don't ever ignore me," he snarled. The slap came fast, faster than anyone expected. A sharp, echoing crack that sliced through the room. Her head snapped to the side, a small line of blood forming at the corner of her lip. The tablet hit the floor. The mess hall went silent. No movement, no voices, just that thin ringing sound of shock. Dawson froze, hands still hanging in the air like even he couldn't believe what he'd done. One of his men whispered, horrified, "Sarge, oh God." Reynolds didn't move for 3 seconds. 4. 5. Then she lifted her head, slowly, deliberately. She touched her lip, examined the blood on her thumb, and let the silence stretch into something sharp enough to cut the room in half. When she stood, she wasn't taller, but somehow she seemed to take up more space. A gravity formed around her, drawing the air tight. Even Dawson stumbled back a step. Her eyes, calm, quiet, dangerous, met his. But she said nothing. Because that silence was the part everyone always underestimated. Colonel Collins appeared at the doorway, already on her phone, already calling it in. "Yes, sir," she murmured. "It's Reynolds. Her cover may be compromised." Cover? The word echoed in Dawson's skull, confusion settling like dust in a room with no air. He opened his mouth to speak, to apologize, to ask what cover, but his squad pulled him away. Reynolds didn't look at him again. She simply picked up her tablet, wiped the screen with the edge of her sleeve, and nodded once to Collins across the room. The colonel's expression said everything. The mission just changed. Reynolds walked out of the mess hall without another word, but her composure wasn't as unshakable as it looked. Behind her stern calm was something she never let anyone see, the faint tremor of an old fear she carried alone. Not fear of Dawson, not fear of the mission, but fear of what she might become if pushed too far, fear of what she had been trained to unleash. Because the truth was simple, brutal, and dangerous. She wasn't supposed to fight back. Not in public. Not where people could see. Not where her past could bleed into the present. But someone had provoked the wrong part of her. Someone had shaken something loose. And deep down, she knew the consequences weren't just about a slap in a cafeteria. The leak, the mission, Dawson's sudden involvement, the name she'd recognized in the brief. Threads were pulling together, threads she'd spent years trying to keep separate. As she stepped into the harsh sunlight outside the mess hall, she whispered to herself, barely audible even to her own ears. "They weren't supposed to know I'm still alive." And that was the part no one at the base understood, not yet. Sometimes the most dangerous soldiers aren't the loud ones. They're the quiet ones. The ones who watch. The ones who endure. The ones who bleed silently rather than shout. And as the wind carried dust across the concrete, Lieutenant Kara Reynolds felt a truth settling in her chest like a warning. Someone somewhere had finally decided to expose her. Someone who wanted her dead. Someone who knew exactly what she was. What she still is. A shadow. A ghost. A weapon the world was never meant to see. Why did Colonel Collins look almost afraid of her? That was the question that followed Lieutenant Kara Reynolds as she strode across the tarmac, the late afternoon heat blurring the air around her. Collins matched her pace with clipped steps, her jaw tight, her hand wrapped around a folder she hadn't opened yet. The colonel was difficult to rattle, but today, something weighed behind her eyes. "You're being reassigned," Collins said without warning. Kara didn't slow, because of him. Because of what he triggered. Collins handed her the sealed envelope. "Your team is already assembling. Wheels up in 3 hours." Kara stopped. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. "You're deploying me with Dawson." Collins didn't deny it, and 2 of his Marines. "That's suicide," Kara said quietly, "for them." Collins exhaled hard, lowering her voice. "The mission is no longer optional, and whether I like it or not, Command thinks integrating Dawson is symbolic." "Symbolic," Kara repeated, emotionless. "Of what?" "That we can work together," Collins hesitated, "or that we can pretend to." Kara didn't smile. She simply turned, walking toward the hangar where her gear was waiting, but something inside her tightened, an ache she'd never learned to name. Not fear, not anger, something closer to disappointment. Because she'd seen it before. People changed their opinion of her only after they learned the truth, only after they realized what she carried, only after they understood what she had done. And by then, it was always too late. Inside the hangar, fluorescent lights flickered over the assembled team, 4 silhouettes waiting in the dim space. Lieutenant Maria Vasquez leaned against a crate, arms crossed, a grin tugging at her mouth. "You look like hell, Reynolds." Kara dropped her duffel bag. "Rough lunch." Chief Petty Officer Layla Jackson raised a brow. "We heard." Of course they had. News traveled fast on base, especially news involving Kara. Vasquez tossed her a water bottle. "So who are we babysitting today?" Kara didn't answer. She didn't have to. The hangar door rumbled open behind her and Sergeant Marcus Dawson stepped inside, cleaner now, sober but stiff with the memory of what he'd done. 2 Marines followed, both younger, both trying to pretend they weren't terrified to be here. Dawson's eyes met hers. Shame flickered, but something else too, something like confusion. He nodded, not quite an apology, not yet. "Let's begin," Kara said. They gathered around the table where a digital map glowed with satellite images. Buildings, roads, heat signatures, and at the center of it all, a red blinking icon. 3 U.S. aid workers, Kara began, and 1 unidentified operative held here. She zoomed in. The compound expanded into view. Warlord Abdi Hassan's fortress. Dawson studied the image with a practiced eye. "Looks fortified. We breach the east wall, sweep through the armory, take the courtyard, grab the hostages, and fight our way out." "No," Kara said softly. He glanced at her, annoyed. "That's standard doctrine." "For Marines," Kara replied, "not for us." "Us." The word made Dawson stiffen. Jackson leaned forward. "We're not kicking down doors tonight, Sergeant." Vasquez traced the map with a finger. "We move in clean, quiet, invisible." Dawson scoffed. "There's no such thing in a compound like this." Kara met his eyes. Her voice stayed calm, but there was steel under every syllable. "There is when you're trained to be a ghost." He opened his mouth to argue. He never got the chance. The room darkened as the projector displayed thermal scans, blue silhouettes moving along walls, red clusters in the courtyard, shifting patterns of heat and motion. Kara continued. "They're expecting resistance from the outside. They're not expecting us to already be inside." Dawson frowned. "Already be? What does that mean?" Kara tapped the screen. "We infiltrate the perimeter here. No noise, no alerts. We eliminate the guards silently." Both Marines exchanged doubtful looks. Vasquez smirked. "Relax, just try not to shoot anything that moves, especially us." The briefing continued, but Dawson wasn't listening anymore. He was watching Kara. Her posture, her control, her confidence in silence and shadows. And the strangest thought crept into his mind, one that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. What the hell is she? When the briefing ended, the team dispersed to prep their gear. Kara stayed behind to pack her final equipment, but her hands paused over a matte black knife strapped into her kit. The blade was old, familiar, heavy with memory. She closed her eyes. A face she hadn't seen in years flashed across her mind. A warning whispered in a dark room. A promise she'd made long ago. "They can never know what we made you." Her chest tightened. She shoved the thought away. Not tonight. Outside, engines roared to life as the Blackhawk was rolled onto the tarmac. The sun dipped low, casting the world in gold. Shadows stretched across the ground, long and sharp and honest in a way people seldom were. Dawson approached slowly. "Lieutenant." She didn't turn. "Sergeant." He swallowed. "About earlier." "We don't have time for apologies." "I'm not trying to apologize." He hesitated. I'm trying to understand. Kara finally faced him. He looked different from the man who'd struck her earlier, like pieces of him had broken off and he wasn't sure how to put them back. He studied her bandaged lip, then dropped his gaze. I've been in combat 12 years, he said quietly. I've seen people fight, break, hide, but you earlier the way you looked at me. He stopped, unsure how to finish. Kara helped him. You saw something you couldn't explain. He nodded. That's why you reacted, she said softly. Not because you saw weakness, because for a split second you thought you saw something else. Dawson didn't deny it. What did you think you saw? She asked. He struggled. A threat, I guess, but not physical. Kara's voice lowered. Then do yourself a favor, Sergeant. He waited. Don't try to understand me. She stepped past him, heading toward the chopper. But Dawson couldn't move. Not yet. Not until he asked the question that had been clawing at him since she'd stood up in that cafeteria. Lieutenant, he called after her, what are you? Kara stopped at the helicopter's open door. She didn't turn, didn't smile, didn't soften. She just answered with the truth that wasn't a truth at all. Someone who was never supposed to exist. Then she climbed inside. Minutes later, the Black Hawk lifted from the ground, cutting through the fatting light, its rotors muffled by equipment most soldiers had never even seen. Dawson sat across from her, helmet strapped, rifle secured, eyes locked on her every movement. Her stillness, her breathing, her focus. It was like sitting across from a storm right before it breaks. And as the helicopter carved through the night sky toward the Somali coastline, Dawson realized something he hadn't expected. The woman he'd slapped in the mess hall. The woman he'd dismissed. The woman he'd underestimated. Might be the deadliest person he'd ever share a battlefield with. Yet she didn't look deadly. She looked tired, haunted, human. And in the churning dark of the sky, at the edge of a mission that would change them both, Dawson wondered quietly, maybe for the first time in his life, if monsters weren't born on battlefields. Maybe they were created long before that. Why did the night feel wrong? That question clung to Sergeant Marcus Dawson the moment their boots touched the Somali soil. The Black Hawk lifted away into the dark, disappearing like a swallowed shadow, leaving the six of them alone beneath a moon too thin to offer comfort. The air tasted metallic, still, too still. Reynolds didn't hesitate. She took point, her movements precise, almost soundless, her silhouette gliding rather than walking. Vasquez shadowed her right flank. Jackson guarded the rear. Dawson and his two Marines, Corporal Hayes and Private Kim, formed the middle. And even in formation, Dawson couldn't shake it. The unease. The wrongness. It clung to his spine like a cold hand. For miles, they moved in silence, the kind that pressed against your eardrums until you swore you could hear your pulse. Every twig snap under Hayes' boot felt too loud. Every shifting breeze felt like footsteps that weren't theirs. Reynolds raised a fist, halt signal. They dropped low. She scanned the horizon, eyes narrowing. Dawson pulled up his NVGs, following her line of sight, but he saw nothing, only distant brush and the faint outline of Hassan's compound against the ravine beyond. But Reynolds whispered, "They've increased the outer patrols." Dawson frowned. "How do you know?" Her answer came without hesitation, but with something else beneath it, an old instinct she couldn't hide. "Because they're expecting something." Us, Hayes asked. "No," she said softly, "something bigger." The words chilled them all. They kept moving. As they neared the first perimeter wall, Dawson caught something he'd never seen in all his years of deployments. A look on Reynolds' face that wasn't fear, but remembrance. Like she'd seen this exact situation before. Like she already knew how it would unfold. Jackson whispered, "Left guard, 200 meters." Right tower, Vasquez added. Heat signature, possible sniper. Reynolds exhaled slowly. We go quiet. Dawson prepared to step forward, rifle raised, but Reynolds stopped him with a whisper so soft he barely heard it. Not you. She motioned to Vasquez and Jackson. Without another word, they melted into the dark. Dawson blinked. 1 second they were there, the next, gone. Minutes passed, long minutes, the kind that stretch your nerves thin. Then 2 faint clicks came through comms. Reynolds nodded, unconscious move. They climbed the wall with effortless synchronization. Dawson tried to keep up, but everything he did felt loud compared to their silence. Hayes slipped on the final ledge, and Kara caught him by his vest before he could fall. She didn't grunt, didn't strain. She pulled him up with one arm. Hayes stared at her, breathless. How? Focus, she whispered, letting go. They dropped into the compound. Inside, chaos. Gunshots inside the walls, not directed at them. Panic, screams, movement. Dawson hissed, what the hell? Reynolds' heart sank. She felt it in the air, the wrongness, the trap closing. They're executing hostages, she said. Vasquez swore softly. Jackson's hand tightened around her weapon. Dawson's jaw clenched. We breach the main hall now. Reynolds shook her head. No charges, no noise. We can still save them. Lieutenant, we don't have. We do it my way, she snapped, eyes narrowing. For the first time, Dawson didn't argue. They moved toward the courtyard, and then Dawson understood something he hadn't before, something horrible. The enemy was running toward the center of the compound. Not away from it. What are they doing? Hayes whispered. Reynolds' face tightened, burning evidence. Firelight flickered behind the central doorway, screams followed, a child's cry, then another gunshot. Dawson lunged forward, but Kara grabbed his vest and yanked him back with terrifying strength. Wait, she ordered. Let go, Lieutenant. You'll get them killed, she hissed. Look. And then Dawson saw it, the tripwire at the threshold, 2 inches above the dirt, invisible unless you were looking for it. He froze. Jesus. She released him and stepped forward herself, diffusing it in seconds with motions so small Dawson almost didn't catch them. Vasquez whispered, room is rigged, multiple charges. Jackson added, monofilament and thermal mines. Dawson swallowed. How the hell do you know that? Reynolds didn't answer. She simply began cutting wires no one else could see. 30 seconds, 40, 60. Then, clear, she whispered. They breached. Inside, smoke hung thick. A single lantern flickered, casting warped shadows across the walls. The hostages were huddled near the far corner, 2 aid workers alive, one unmoving, blood pooling beneath him. But what stopped Reynolds cold wasn't them. It was the man bound to a chair at the center of the room, head slumped forward. The missing operative. The man who'd trained her. She rushed forward. He lifted his head slowly, eyes focusing through the haze. And when he recognized her, something broke inside both of them. Kara, his voice cracked. They knew you'd come. Her throat tightened, but her hands moved fast, cutting his restraints. Who leaked? He swallowed. Someone high, someone who wanted you exposed. She froze. Exposed. The word hit her with the force of a memory she'd buried years ago. Dawson's voice interrupted. Lieutenant, movement. Hassan's men poured in from the courtyard. The ambush triggered. Gunfire erupted, deafening in the enclosed space. Vasquez dragged an aid worker behind cover. Jackson fired bursts that clipped 2 attackers. Hayes screamed as a round grazed his helmet. Reynolds slammed the operative behind a crate. Stay down. Dawson yelled, we need to pull out. No, Reynolds shot back. We need to hold the north corridor or we'll be cut off. How? Trust me. She pivoted, firing 2 controlled bursts. Both hit center mass. She grabbed Dawson's vest and shoved him behind a concrete pillar as an RPG detonated where he'd been standing. His ears rang, dust filled his mouth. Through the haze, he saw a silhouette, hers, charging forward, knife flashing in the muzzle light, her movements a blur of precision and violence that didn't belong to any training he'd ever seen. She wasn't fighting like a soldier. She was fighting like someone who'd lost everything before and refused to lose again. "Go," she shouted over the chaos. "Get them out." Vasquez grabbed the wounded aid worker and sprinted toward the outer hall. Jackson followed, blood trailing from her arm. Dawson moved to cover them, then felt a hand on his arm. The operative, pale, weak, struggling to stay upright. "She'll stay," he rasped. "She always stays." Dawson didn't understand, didn't want to understand. He looked back into the room. Reynolds leaped over fallen debris, tackled an attacker, twisted his wrist until his rifle fell, and ended the fight without hesitation. 3 more rushed her. She didn't hesitate then either. She fought with the certainty of someone who didn't expect to leave. Dawson forced himself to turn away, hauling the operative toward the back exit. But just before he disappeared through the doorway, he looked over his shoulder one last time. And what he saw would stay with him for the rest of his life. Lieutenant Kara Reynolds, covered in smoke, blood streaking down her forehead, breathing hard but steady, standing alone in a collapsing room full of enemies. Like a ghost refusing to fade. The woman he'd slapped hours ago was saving all of them. And he knew, deep in his chest, that she might not make it out. Why wasn't she coming out? That was the only thought running through Sergeant Marcus Dawson's mind as he stumbled into the clearing, hauling the weakened CIA operative against his shoulder. Behind him, bursts of gunfire echoed through the ravine, faint but terrifying in their persistence. The night air tasted like dust and fear. The hostages huddled near the extraction point, 2 aid workers shivering, one unconscious. Jackson slumped beside them with a blood-soaked sleeve pressed to her arm. Vasquez paced like a caged animal, glancing toward the ridge every 3 seconds, her face tight with contained dread. But the one person everyone watched for, the one person who should have been there first, was nowhere. Reynolds was still inside. Dawson lowered the operative carefully. "She's not behind us." Vasquez froze. "What?" Jackson forced herself upright despite the pain. "She'll be here, she always." A thunderous explosion rolled through the valley, lighting the night sky for a split second. The shockwave hit them a moment later, a brutal punch of heat and sand. Dawson's heart stopped. Vasquez whispered, "No, no, no." Jackson's voice cracked. That was the central hall. The place Kara had been holding the line. Dawson didn't wait. He sprinted toward the smoke. "Sergeant," Vasquez shouted, "get back here, Dawson." He ignored her, his boots hammered against the dirt, lungs burning, eyes stinging. Halfway up the ridge, the operative called after him, voice hoarse but certain. "She's alive." Dawson didn't know if he believed it, but he needed to, because the alternative carved something cold into his chest. He reached the crest of the ridge and dropped flat, scanning the hillside through his NVGs. Flames chewed through the compound below, devouring what remained of the central structure. Bodies on the ground, shadows flickering through the smoke. Then, movement. A small figure stumbling down the slope, smoke swirling around her like a shroud. Kara. And she wasn't walking alone. A limp form hung across her shoulders, Vasquez. Dawson swore under his breath and launched into a run. But as he descended, he saw something else. 3 armed fighters breaking from the tree line behind her, closing fast. He raised his rifle. Reynolds' foot slipped. She crashed to one knee, gripping Vasquez tighter, her breath ragged and uneven. Blood streaked down her temple, dripping from her jawline. Her left hand shook violently, fingers twitching from nerve shock or pain or both. But she didn't stop. Didn't surrender. Didn't drop her teammate. She shifted Vasquez higher and forced herself to her feet. Dawson fired. One fighter dropped. Jackson's distant rifle cracked. Another fell. The third sprinted toward Kara with a raised blade. Dawson barreled down the slope, screaming, "Reynolds down." She didn't duck. She turned. Her elbow struck the attacker's throat before he reached her. A brutal, perfect strike. His blade grazed her vest but never found flesh. She spun, grabbed him by the collar, and used his momentum to send him tumbling. Then her knees buckled. Dawson reached her just as she collapsed forward, still clutching Vasquez, as if letting go would mean failing something far deeper than a mission. "Lieutenant, hey, look at me," he said, dropping to his knees beside her. Her eyes fluttered open. No panic. No fear. Just a dull exhaustion, the look of someone who'd emptied every reserve she had. "Is she alive?" Kara whispered, referring to Vasquez. Dawson checked quickly, pulse weak but steady. "She's alive because of you," he said. But Kara's gaze drifted past him, unfocused. She wasn't looking at him, she was listening, counting, assessing the sounds of battle as if her mind were still fighting even after her body quit. "More coming," she murmured. Dawson turned sharply. "Where?" She lifted a shaky hand, pointing toward the far ridge. He followed her line of sight, barely catching flashes of movement. "How many?" Kara blinked slowly. "Too many." He swallowed hard. "We're getting you out." She didn't argue. She didn't have the strength left for stubbornness. He lifted her carefully, one arm under her shoulders, the other supporting Vasquez. For a moment, just a moment, Kara leaned into him, not because she trusted him, but because her body had no choice. He wasn't sure why that moment hit him so hard, why carrying her felt heavier than any weight he'd ever shouldered, why the anger and shame and confusion he'd felt earlier twisted into something sharp, something protective. But he didn't have time to understand it. Not now. Gunfire erupted behind them, closer this time. Dawson moved faster. Kara's head fell against his shoulder. Her breath ghosted against his collar. He could feel how cold her skin was becoming, how her muscles trembled with fatigue. Her voice was barely audible. "Don't slow down." "I won't," he said. "Promise," she whispered. "I swear." Behind them, another explosion tore through the compound. He didn't look back. When they reached the clearing, the Black Hawk was already descending, wind whipping up dirt and debris. Vasquez was taken from him by 2 Marines. Medics rushed forward, shouting updates. But Dawson kept moving, carrying Kara toward the helicopter. She stirred weakly. "Dawson." "Save it," he muttered. "You're getting on that helicopter." She shook her head slightly, voice faint. "No, you don't understand." He tightened his hold. "Lieutenant, I'm done underestimating you, but right now, I'm not taking no for an answer." Her fingers curled into the fabric of his sleeve, barely gripping. "That's not what I meant." Her head lifted slightly, eyes locking onto his. There was something in them he hadn't seen before, fear. "Not for herself. For them." "They knew I'd come," she whispered. "This wasn't about the hostages." He froze. "What do you mean?" Kara swallowed painfully. "Someone wanted me visible, traceable, exposed." Dawson felt his stomach drop. Why would anyone want? But she cut him off. Her voice was barely there, a ghost of a whisper. "They're not done." Then her eyes rolled back. Her body went limp. He shouted for a medic. Hands pulled her from his arms. She disappeared behind bodies and flashing lights and shouted orders. Dawson stumbled back, suddenly aware of how hard he was shaking. The CIA operative approached, gripping his own torn side. Whatever she told you. Dawson stared at him. She said this wasn't about the hostages. It wasn't, the operative rasped. Hassan didn't capture me by chance. They were after one name, one asset. He looked toward the helicopter, where Kara lay motionless on a stretcher. Hers. Dawson's blood went cold. Why? The operative's expression darkened, as if dredging up a truth he wished he could bury again. Because Lieutenant Kara Reynolds isn't just a soldier, he said quietly. She's the only survivor of the program they tried to erase. Dawson felt his breath catch. What program? The operative stared at him, really stared, as if weighing the cost of telling him. Finally he answered. The one they built to create shadows. Dawson froze. And the one they're now trying to destroy. Above them, the Blackhawk engines roared to life, drowning out the night. But even through the thunder of rotors, Dawson could still hear his own heartbeat. Loud, uneven, heavy with a truth he didn't understand yet, but would soon have to face. And as the helicopter lifted into the air, carrying Kara Reynolds away into the dark sky, Dawson realized something that cut through him sharper than any blade. Whatever hunted her was coming back. Why did the base feel colder when they returned? Dawson noticed it the second the Blackhawk touched down, even before the rotor slowed, even before medics rushed in to grab the wounded. Something had shifted in the air, an invisible tension, a quiet unease threading through the night like a warning. Colonel Collins stood at the edge of the landing pad, boots planted, arms crossed so tightly it looked painful. Her eyes weren't on the departing medics or the hostages or the groaning Marines. Her eyes were on Kara Reynolds. Unconscious, pale, oxygen mask secured, wires pinned to her skin. Dawson followed as the medics pushed her stretcher toward the medical bay. Vasquez disappeared behind another curtain. Jackson was already being treated, and the aid workers were escorted away by intel officers. But Collins walked beside Kara in dead silence, jaw clenched, knuckles white around a thin folder. When they reached the double doors of the infirmary, a medic blocked her path. "Ma'am, we need space." Collins didn't flinch. "I'm not leaving her." "Colonel." Dawson stepped in. "Let them work, she'll be stable." Collins' eyes flicked to him, sharp, appraising. "You shouldn't even be standing," she said. "You look like hell." He shrugged with one stiff shoulder. "I've had worse." "Not from someone like her," Collins murmured. They both looked through the glass panel. Kara lay motionless under bright surgical lights, her chest rising shallowly, blood still smeared across her cheek. Dawson felt something tighten in his throat. He wasn't used to that, a feeling that made him want to hit something, fix something, protect something he barely understood. "What is she?" he asked quietly. Collins didn't answer at first. She watched Kara with an expression that was almost maternal, but too restrained to be called affection, more like reverence or guilt. Finally she spoke. "She's the result of a mistake." "A mistake," Dawson frowned. "Lieutenant Reynolds nearly died saving all of us." Collins's voice dropped. "And years before that, she nearly died becoming what we made her." Dawson stiffened. "The operative said she's the only survivor of what?" Collins hesitated long enough to make it clear the answer was dangerous. "Then a classified joint program, Navy, CIA, DARPA, early 2000s. "Enhancement?" Dawson asked. "Not chemically." Collins crossed her arms. "Conditioning, adaptation, psychological re-engineering, sensory recalibration. Skills refined beyond normal training. They wanted operatives who could move in darkness, predict motion patterns, neutralize threats quietly." "A super soldier," he said. "No," Collins snapped. "A shadow, someone who could disappear, someone who could win without ever firing a weapon, someone lethal yet invisible." Dawson's swallow felt loud. "What happened to the others?" Collins' eyes dimmed. They didn't survive the training. Dawson let that settle, stomach twisting, and she did. She wasn't supposed to, Collins whispered. Inside the room, Kara's hand twitched beneath the blanket. Barely perceptible, but the subtle movement drew both their attention. Collins exhaled shakily. And now someone wants the world to know exactly what she is. Dawson frowned. The operative said she was hunted. She is, Collins said quietly, and whoever leaked her name to Hassan isn't done. Dawson's voice turned hard. Then we protect her. Collins gave a humorless smile. Sergeant, Kara Reynolds doesn't need protection. The world does. Hours passed before a medic finally stepped out of the bay. She's stable. She needs rest, fluids, and time, but she woke up once. Dawson straightened. Did she say anything? The medic nodded slowly. Just one thing. She asked if anyone else died. Dawson closed his eyes. Of course she did. When they were finally allowed inside, Collins stopped him at the entrance. Don't push her, she warned. She'll talk when she's ready. But Dawson wasn't there for answers. Not anymore. He found a chair beside Kara's bed and sat heavily. Machines beeped softly around them, rhythmic and steady. Her face was less pale now, but exhaustion carved deep shadows under her eyes. She didn't open them when she whispered, "You came." Dawson blinked. "Yeah, I did." There was another explosion, she murmured. The second blast, I thought. Her voice trailed. She swallowed hard as though fighting the memory. You got Vasquez out, Dawson said. She's alive. Kara's breath stuttered with relief. Good. Silence stretched thick, almost gentle. But Dawson couldn't shake the weight pressing against his ribs. The weight of something he needed to say but never learned how. Finally, I was wrong about you. Kara didn't respond at first. Then quietly, softly, you weren't the first. I was the loudest, he corrected. A faint ghost of a smile brushed her lips. Then her expression slipped into something deeper, something vulnerable. They weren't supposed to know, she whispered. He leaned forward. Know what? That I survived, she said. They shut down the program, they erased everything, even my existence. But someone leaked my name, someone who wants me exposed. Dawson clenched his jaw. Why? Kara's eyes opened, tired, pained, haunted. Because if the world knows what I am, they'll hunt us all. He didn't understand then, not fully, but he felt the truth behind her words like a bruise. Colonel Collins knows, she added. She tried to protect us, but someone higher, someone wants me gone. Dawson didn't blink. Then they'll have to go through me. A breath escaped her, soft, shaky, almost disbelieving. You don't understand. I do, he interrupted. Maybe not everything, but enough. Kara didn't argue, not because she agreed, but because arguing required strength she didn't have. Instead, she said something he didn't expect. You shouldn't care, she whispered. I'm not who you think I am. No, Dawson said gently. You're not, you're better. Her eyes softened in a way he wasn't prepared for. But before either of them could say anything else, the lights outside the infirmary flickered. Once, twice, 3 times. Then the hallway alarms blared. Dawson shot to his feet. What the hell? An officer rushed inside. Colonel, the perimeter sensors tripped, north fence, multiple heat signatures. Collins cursed, they found us. Kara's eyes widened, fear slicing through her exhaustion. No, she whispered, not yet, I'm not ready. Dawson turned to her, who found us? But he already knew the answer. Not warlords. Not local militias. Not random threats. Someone who knew exactly who Kara Reynolds was. And had come to finish what they started years ago. In the bed, Kara forced herself upright despite her trembling arms. Dawson, she said, breath rattling. Listen to me. If they breach this base, they won't go after the colonel or you or the hostages. Her eyes locked onto his with something sharp and ancient. "They're coming for me." And for the first time since he met her, she looked afraid. Not of dying, not of pain, but of being taken alive. Outside, the alarms intensified. Boots thundered down the hallway. Orders shouted. Weapons cocked. Lights strobed red. Dawson stepped between Kara and the door, jaw clenched. "Over my dead body," he said. Kara closed her eyes. "That's what I'm afraid of." How long did she have before they reached her? That was the single thought running through Lieutenant Kara Reynolds' mind as alarms blared across the base, red lights strobing against the infirmary walls. The thudding boots of soldiers racing through corridors vibrated through the floor, sharper, faster, more frantic than usual. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't a mistake. They'd come for her. Dawson stood at the foot of her bed, rifle in hand, shoulders squared like a man who had already chosen his side. Not because he understood her, but because he'd seen enough to know she didn't deserve whatever shadow hunted her. Colonel Collins barked orders into her comm, voice clipped and tense. "Lock down the east wing. No one goes in or out unless I say so. We're treating this like a Tier 1 breach, understood?" Affirmations crackled through the channel. Kara drew in a breath so shallow it trembled. She tried to swing her legs off the bed, but pain shot through her ribs and she collapsed back, gasping. Dawson caught her shoulders. "Hey, stop." "I need to move," she whispered. "I can't be in here." "You're not going anywhere in your condition," he snapped. Kara's eyes hardened, quiet fire beneath exhaustion. "If I stay here, people die." Dawson didn't respond, but he didn't have to. She could see the truth flickering across his face. He knew she wasn't wrong. Collins stepped between them. "Lieutenant, you're not going anywhere, not until we understand the threat." "They're here for me," Kara said softly. "That's all the understanding you need." Collins stiffened. "We can protect you." Kara gave a small, sad smile. "You train me, Colonel, you know better." The base lights flickered again, once, twice, and for a heartbeat everything plunged into darkness. Then emergency backups kicked on, bathing the hallway in a cold, sterile white. A voice crackled through the intercom. "Contact at the North Gate, unknown squad. No insignia, no call sign. They're armed, repeat, heavily armed." Collins' face drained of color. "Ghost unit." Dawson frowned. "Who?" Kara closed her eyes. "The people who shut down the program, the people who don't leave survivors." Outside the infirmary, gunfire erupted, short bursts, disciplined, precise. "Professional." Dawson clenched his jaw. "They're getting through." Collins grabbed his arm. "Protect her. I'll coordinate with QRF." She ran out. The doors slammed shut behind her. And then the only sound left was the rhythmic beep of Kara's heart monitor. Dawson looked at her, really looked at her. The bruises, the dried blood, the stubborn determination in her jaw, the quiet fear buried deep in her eyes. "Tell me what I'm fighting," he said. Kara exhaled slowly. "People who believe I shouldn't exist. People who think what I am is a liability." "And what are you?" he asked. She looked up at him, expression steady, vulnerable, painfully honest. "Someone they created for missions that should never have been attempted. Someone who survived when no one else did. Someone who knows things they want buried forever." Dawson shook his head. "You're not a mistake." Her voice cracked. "They think I am." "Then they're wrong," he said firmly. Kara didn't get to answer. The hallway outside erupted in screams. Dawson moved instantly, positioning himself between the door and her bed. The sounds of boots pounding the floor grew louder, too coordinated to be friendly, too quiet to be panicked. Then a thud slammed against the infirmary entrance. Kara's pulse spiked. Dawson raised his rifle. "Stay behind me." Another impact, metal groaned. Kara forced herself upright. Pain ripped through her side, but she ignored it, pulling the IV from her arm. Dawson glanced back. "What are you doing?" "Standing," she said. "You can't fight." "I'm not fighting," she whispered. "I'm not letting them take me alive." Dawson's chest tightened so hard he almost forgot to breathe. "Don't say that." "It's the truth." "No," he said, voice rising. "You've survived everything else. You'll survive this." Kara held his gaze. "People like me don't get endings, Sergeant. We get erased." The door buckled inward. Dawson took a breath, slow, steady. And for the first time since he'd met her, something changed in his voice. Something raw. "You're not alone anymore," he said. "So they're going to have to erase me too." Kara didn't speak, but her eyes softened in a way that broke something open inside both of them. The door burst inward. Black figures rushed through, silent, masked, rifles raised. They moved like her team once had, fast, coordinated, deadly. Dawson fired first. Chaos exploded across the room, shouts, muzzle flashes, overturned equipment. A bullet grazed Dawson's arm. Another embedded into the wall inches from Kara's head. Kara reached for the fallen medic's cart, hands shaking, muscles screaming in protest. She grabbed a scalpel. The irony almost made her laugh. A weapon meant to heal, not kill. But tonight she had no choice. One of the intruders lunged toward her. Kara slashed upward, cutting across his forearm. He recoiled. Dawson tackled him from behind, slamming him into the wall. Another man grabbed Kara by the wrist, twisting hard. Her cry caught in her throat. "Target secure," he grunted, dragging her toward the door. Dawson roared, an animal sound, and threw himself at the man. They crashed to the floor. Kara fell with them, coughing, vision blurring. Two more intruders stormed in, rifles aimed. Dawson shielded her with his body. "Get behind me." But she was already fatting, strength draining, the world narrowing into a tunnel of noise and pain. Then, a single thunderous blast. Not from the intruders. From behind them. Colonel Collins stood with a shotgun braced against her shoulder, face carved from stone. Two intruders fell instantly. A third spun around, but Dawson shot him before he could fire. Smoke drifted across the room as the last masked figure collapsed. Silence. Slow, heavy, deafening. Kara slumped against the bed frame, chest rising in shallow, trembling breaths. Collins rushed to her. "Lieutenant, look at me. Stay awake, stay with us." Dawson knelt beside her, his breathing ragged. Kara tried to speak. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I thought they'd never stop." Collins squeezed her hand. "They won't, but neither will we." Dawson nodded, jaw clenched with something fierce. "You're safe now." But Kara's gaze drifted past them, toward the shattered doorway, toward the blood on the floor, toward the shadows that still trembled at the edges of her vision. "No one is safe," she whispered. "Not until they're done." Collins placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "They won't be done, not as long as you're alive." Kara's eyes closed, exhaustion overwhelming her. "Then I'll keep fighting," she murmured, "as long as I can." Dawson looked at her, really looked, and understood something deep, something quiet. Her entire life had been spent fighting in the dark. Tonight she didn't fight alone. And maybe, for the first time, she didn't want to. A medic rushed in, followed by two more. They lifted Kara onto a new stretcher, Collins and Dawson walking beside her as she was taken down the hallway, past shattered glass, past bullet holes, past the wreckage left behind. Outside, dawn crept across the sky. Soft, quiet, hopeful. Kara whispered something as they wheeled her towards surgery, words so faint Dawson had to bend close to hear them. "Thank you for seeing me." He swallowed hard. "It was an honor, Lieutenant." Her eyes fluttered shut. And for the first time since he'd met her, Dawson realized the truth. Strength wasn't always the loudest thing in the room. Sometimes it was the quiet breath of someone who kept going when the world told her to stop. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts and survives.